Welcome back to the Champions Playbook Podcast here inside the studio at Franklin Bridge. Thank y'all so much for taking a listen to us today. And first of all, we want to start out by thanking our sponsors for this season of the Champions Playbook. So we have Strixon, who we trust them with our game, and they give us the tools to be able to perform out there on the golf course the best we know how. And they're an awesome company, so make sure to check them out if you are in the market for new golf clubs. The other sponsor that we have, super exciting for this year, is Arccos. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about Arccos?
So Arccos is a stat tracking company that has a device at the end of each club, and with digital spacing tracking, when you make contact with a golf ball, it picks it up, and it goes all the way in depth. Once you've played the entire round, it starts to learn how far you hit every club. It knows where the wind is and all of those kinds of factors while you're playing, so it can even suggest clubs to hit the whole 9 yards.
Yes, please.
Our guest is like, yeah, sign us up for that. So, but it's a wonderful tool, allows me to kind of go in, and I can look at it in depth. I can actually even see where each shot was hit overlaid on the hole. So from a coaching standpoint, when you're in on that, when you come in for your lesson, I'm able to kind of scroll through some of that and say, hey, did you know there's a pattern to when you tend to miss it right or tend to miss it left? And it's not just people like, I just always screw these 3 holes up. Yeah, they all have this thing in common.
Amazing.
So it's incredible.
And we actually have a promo code with Arccos.
Yep.
Thank you, Arccos, for sponsoring Cracking the Code this winter and the Champions Playbook as well. If you guys think that would be something that would be useful for you, you can use our promo code ONERULE15, ONERULE15, and you'll get 15% off your first purchase.
Yep.
It's amazing. So thanks so much, Arccos. We got some exciting things to announce. First of all, you can follow Scott on social media at @HasseyGolf, 2 S's, 2 E's.
Yep.
You can also find us on YouTube if you just search the Champions Playbook. And Scott, do you think we've kind of like teased it a little bit in our last few podcasts, but do we want to like announce officially what our new brand will be at the start of 2023?
Yeah, we don't have a logo for it yet.
We don't have a logo, but I think the name
The name
is good.
is the No Mulligans Podcast.
The No Mulligans Podcast. So
You
if
heard
you
it
guys
here
like
first.
that, we'd love to hear it from you. We're going to be releasing a few things starting 2023. But if you're on YouTube, make sure you search the Champions Playbook. We'll let you guys know when that branding changes. So super excited. You want to start our podcast off?
Yeah, so we've talked about a lot about leadership. We've talked about Jocko. We've talked about Gary Vee. We've talked about got Ramsey, like Simon Sinek. All of the major mainstream guys. We've had Scott Spector on my podcast in the past, good friend of mine. He's actually got some sponsoring for this is just a sidebar for you. He's got sponsor dollars for the next 3 years to try and get on the senior tour.
Oh, let's go. Yeah.
And by the way, he shot 59 at Chateau Elan a few weeks ago. So Scott's the real deal.
He's been posting on Instagram some of his swings, and I'm
He's hitting it
very
so
impressed.
good right now. So great. So I'm excited for him, but he's been one of our leaders. He had a book as well, and our guest has several books. Really
I heard
cool.
6 books.
Yeah, 6, 7, 8, something. Just lost track. But yeah, Scott's book is it's kind of it's a 7-step type book, which is cool. It's more in depth, kind of like my first book where you kind of work through it. But Jamie's, the book that we're going to kind of push here during this podcast, is very much kind of a like bullet points. Here's things you can grab. It reminds me a lot of what am I thinking of? The Game I Love by Sam Snead. Remember we went through a couple of those?
We went through a few.
Kind
of
of
those,
like coffee table style book where like you can sit at your bedside table and everybody's like, well, I don't have time to read. It's like, yeah, you do.
This is a handbook. This is super punchy. Yeah, meant to be helpful. Yeah.
So I love the difference that this has, right? So I like both. I'm very dynamic in that sense. So I haven't read the whole thing, but kind of was able to glance through it a little bit before we started. But with us, we have, I'm going to let you give your exact title and what you do, but is Jamie George with us, based here in Nashville. So Jamie, if you'll tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah.
And
I'm an executive coach.
Which is what Scott did. So yeah, that's easy. I was like, I don't know what the terminology is.
It's life coaching. It's executive coaching. I write a little bit. I dabble in the entertainment space. So we've got some shows we're working on. We filmed a couple pilots this year. for some television shows. We'll see what happens with that.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
Yeah. Well, although I will say this, after listening to Jack talk, I never want to talk again. I mean, talk about a podcast.
I know. How about
Are
his
you
voice?
kidding me?
I've said
Like,
that
this is
so
not
many times.
fair.
I know.
How did he get that voice?
I know.
So whatever you do for the rest of your life, keep doing this.
Yeah, I'll do something in this space.
Oh my
forever,
heavens! Yeah, I'm like, I need to hire him for every time we do a voiceover for anything.
Hey, I'm open for business.
Okay, all right,
Give me a
good.
shout.
All
Give
right,
me a
Jack,
shout.
I'm coming after you. No, so most of my time is spent, probably 80% of my time is spent doing a lot of corporate coaching. I work with a lot of C-suites, just a lot of folks in entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, that kind of thing. But I love also coaching for the masses in whatever way I can. So we do a little thing on TikTok. We launched a podcast a month ago called the Thrivalist Podcast, and all my work is about going from surviving to thriving. That's our world.
I love that. Just surviving to thriving. I feel like that's speaking from somebody who's in their mid-20s right now. I feel like we start to, and I'm starting to see this transition from surviving to then thriving, finding your voice, finding what you love to do, and then just going out and executing that. And I think that for a lot of people, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like a lot of people can even get up to 40, 50 years old and just be surviving throughout that entire time.
People can live a lifetime that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's so useful, and why I'm so glad you're on this podcast, to be able to find some catalysts that might be able to give people ideas of how to start thriving.
Almost everybody I interact with, when they're stuck or they feel challenged, or maybe they even have a little motion but they want momentum, it almost always comes down to one of these three things. Number one, who am I? So it's about identity. Number two, why am I here? What's my purpose? And number three, what do I want? And almost any time you have a problem, you can go back to one of those three things. I've gotten lost in my identity. I'm having an identity crisis, which, by the way, everybody has identity crises because you go from one identity to another. That's pretty. I'm a student. Oh, now I'm not a student. What am I now? Like, then I'm in this other thing. Well, what am I now? So there is this. Who am I? And of course, what happens, I use a little spiritual frame here as well, is ultimately, to me, the long journey is this awakening to who I am in this deep, deep place, right? In deep recesses of my soul. There's always this awakening. Life comes to us as our teacher to show us this human experience is revealing something. And then, why am I here? What's my purpose? And when we get distracted from purpose, we feel incongruent. If you're unhappy for one reason. Anybody listening, if you're unhappy, it comes down to one thing. There's some kind of incongruence inside. It's incoherent. Something inside is not aligned. Mm-hmm. If you're unhappy, it's because something internally is not lined up. And you can almost go back to one of these three things. And the third one is, what do I want? And to actually communicate what I want is vulnerable. Because to acknowledge that I want something implies there's something I don't have.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
And so to actually articulate it and put it like, no, this is what I want. Oh, now I'm accountable to myself.
Totally.
It's funny. I do that with students, depending on where they're at. Like, I try to deal a lot with the identity part. And the gentleman I learned to teach from, Hank Johnson, he's passed away a couple of years ago. He would give this talk every year at a tournament in Birmingham. It was a big junior high school tournament. It was a kind of a remembrance tournament. It's called the Bradley Johnson Memorial Tournament. And Bradley was one of Hank's students who took second at the U.S. Amateur Championship one year, and like all the guys on tour knew who he was going to come up. And then Bradley passed away in a car accident. And so Hank every year would present at that dinner after that first round. And every single year he said, golf is not who you are, it's just something that you do. And that was like, he would start maybe a little bit different, but he always ended there. And he said, if golf is who you are, and you just walk around with whatever your most recent score is. I'm 67, I'm 92, I'm 105. Good. And so like always trying to pull at that who I am. But the fun one for me recently has been, I've started to pick up some more college players recently, some elite juniors, and our winter program. We have 52 total people, juniors and adults, of like, well, what do you want? Well, I just want to be better. Like, what do you want? Like, well, I'd like to go from a 12 to like a 9. I was like, is that what you want? Or do you want to be lower? Well, I just, I'd really like to be a 5. Okay, now we're talking.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like,
right.
You're just like kind of short selling yourself. Like, I don't know that I can really do this. I was like, what's wrong with, you don't have to tell it to everybody. But like, I need to know what you actually want so that I know how far I can push you, and I can tie everything we do to that thing. Like we're doing this to get to that. We can't get to that if we don't have this.
Yeah, where there is no vision, the people perish, right? Like there has to be something you're aiming at.
Yeah.
And the magic to me is if I'm obsessed with the outcome, right, and I attach to the outcome, then I'm probably going to suffer because the outcome's not going to be exactly what I thought it would be once I arrive. Even if it is the outcome I wanted, it's probably not going to fulfill me exactly the way I thought it was once I got there.
It reminds me of the Tom Brady interview. Was it like early 2000s? Was like they were asking, so what's it like to win a Super Bowl or another one? He said, I can't help but think that there's just something more out there. Like it wasn't what he thought.
You get to the thing. So the magic, it's cliche, right? But it really isn't about the destination. It's about the journey. And yet you still aim for the destination.
Oh my God, yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with going, wait, I want the 5. Okay, now we're going to take a journey to get to the 5. Now the journey is the magic. Enjoy being present to the daily failures and successes. Enjoy being present to taking the swing. Enjoy being present to what you're learning. Let life come to you as your teacher. And you might arrive at that 5. And you might get there and it might be deeply satisfying. And you might arrive at the 5 and go, actually, I realized that it wasn't about golf for me. This was actually, I was resolving some other deep issue that I had that I really wanted to resolve. And it was just challenging myself to move past that, right? It actually was something else. That's not unusual. That happens all the time for us. Yeah. But to show up each day, that's the magic. Can I be present to the moment? Here I am with my golf coach, and we're having an interaction. I'm present to him. He's present to me, and we're a part of this game that's challenging me to see the world through a different lens, which means I've got the opportunity to grow, change, adapt, and evolve.
I feel like a lot of people think that there's going to be some euphoric answer at the end, at that destination that they're shooting for, and I've found throughout, I was telling you a little bit about my background before we started the show, and I've found that going through that journey only gives me more clarity to what I want in the future. And so Matthew McConaughey has this famous speech where he talks about my role model. My role model is myself in 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Or myself in 5 years.
Which he said he ad-libbed, by the way, in the moment.
Oh, yeah. That's completely off the top. He's one of the most eloquent speakers I've ever seen.
His book, Green Lights, is really good.
I've read it. Yeah, it was amazing. And but he was saying, my role model is myself in 5 years or 10 years. I forget which metric he used. He goes, I know I'll never get there, but he's always going to be my role model to push myself to what I know that I can be, my fullest potential. And so I think my question for you, Jamie, is you've kind of given us your background on what you do professionally on a day-to-day, but can you take us through your journey up until this point? Because you speak with such conviction. It makes me feel like you're very comfortable and there's no inadequacies going on in you as far as like your pursuit to your own path. So kind of take us through that journey for you.
Well, there's all kinds of inadequacies. It's both. So to me, there is always this both and. Have you guys seen this the new show, the holiday movie with Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell? It's called Spirited. It's hysterical. It is.
Those two in it.
Think a comedic, crass version of The Greatest Showman.
Love that.
Okay.
So it's not super crass, but it's a little bit like it's a little off. But it's really, really funny. But what I loved about I don't want to give too much away, but what I loved about the Apple TV thing, what I loved about it was because there's a little twist on the Christmas Story and whatever else. But what it really says is, hey, at the end of the day, we're both light and shadow. Like it's not you had this wonderful moment, now life is perfect. Or you're a horrible person. We tend to categorize people. We villainize people who see the world differently through us politically. Sometimes people maybe who fit a certain category for us, we tend to villainize. And then we put, and then other people are heroes. This is pretty natural for us when we categorize people typically out of some kind of fear mechanism, right? But we like to create black and white scenarios. But the truth of the matter is it's all gray. Everybody is walking around as a light and shadow. Everybody's got both. You have the capacity to be a killer, and you have the capacity to be a saint. Like both of those things exist within everyone. So to me, there's an old I don't know if it's Choctaw or Cherokee. The different tribes have variations on this myth, but one of their stories is about the white wolf and the black wolf, and the story is just. Hey, one grows bigger. Which one grows bigger? It's the one you feed. And so which one are you giving attention attention to. The inadequacies that come up in me, the things I contend with, there are two dominant addictions for me. Number one would be achievement. Is there are times if I'm off, if I'm not centered, if I'm not grounded in who I am, then I'm measuring my worth by what I've achieved. And sometimes I'm like, I didn't get a whole lot done today. I'm like at home, like moving my clothes around in my closet. Like, I mean, I'm telling you, I have a little bit of my OCD shows up that way, but it's showing up that way because I feel like, okay, good, I got that done. So if I'm not grounded, there's this hook in my mind where I'm like, today I really wasn't worth much today because I didn't get enough done. So that's an addiction of choice for me. Second addiction of choice for me would be approval. What do other people think of me? I've done a lot. I'm 52. That was way more dominant in my 30s and 40s. But it's out there. That beast is still there if I give attention to it.
It'll come right on back.
Yeah, it absolutely. So the work I've done to walk confidently in who I am has had to do with really recognizing, for me, and this is me personally for sure, failure is only feedback. Failure is not bad. I'm not awful. This isn't something I can combat. Like this is not going to bury me. I'm not a bad person. Anytime I don't measure up to my own standard, instead of taking it on as an identity thing again, oh my gosh, this says something about who I am. No, this says nothing about who I am. Failure is feedback. Like, that didn't work. So what do you want to do, Jamie? Well, I guess maybe I could make another choice. Yeah, I'll make another choice. Well, what if that choice sends you down the wrong path or it doesn't work out? Well, I could make another choice.
Yeah, you're still standing.
Okay.
It's like a giant flow chart.
I'll make I'll make another choice. And that, to me, Jack, what has been very empowering for me is to realize that every human being has a superpower, and it's the superpower of choice. I get to make a choice every day. I get to choose my mindset. I get to choose my attitude. Viktor Frankl is famous for saying in Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about, he made it through the Holocaust, through a concentration camp. And he's famous for telling a story about one of the people in the camp who was giving their last little shards of bread and passing it along and going, they can take everything from me, but they can't take what I do with my heart. I choose who I want to love and who I don't want to love. I can choose if I want to be generous or not generous. That is still my choice. I get to choose my attitude on any given day. So sometimes we get locked into a mindset where I'm the victim of this weather. I'm the victim of my back pain. I'm the victim of this relationship. I'm the victim of the economy. And when I'm a victim, I have no power. And all I do is I whine, I gripe. Instead, the power position is like, well, actually, I have a choice.
Well, and when you do that whining and that griping, you actually perpetuate, you bring about the very thing that it is that you fear.
There's our quantum physics right there, right? Yeah. Yeah. So in Newtonian physics there's a cause and an effect. In quantum physics, you're causing effect at all times. So quantum physics is saying, wait a second, the observer is always having an effect on their reality.
It's not binary, no.
No, right, that's right. So that's why a waiter or waitress can walk up to your table and one person's like, oh my gosh, that person's so rude. And the other person can be like, man, I think that person's having a rough day.
Right.
Which way do you want to see it? We are meaning-making individuals, and we do this all the time. So the question before all of us every day about everything is, what choice do I want to make?
Yeah, and you're going to make some bad ones.
And it's okay because failure is only feedback. That's my journey, Jack. Failure for me was like, oh my gosh, I can't fail. And when I finally accepted, wait, if I avoid any attempt to do something new or risk, just because I'm afraid of failure, then I'm never going to expand.
To you, what is that difference? Because I think a lot of people are afraid to fail, including myself. And so when you talk about, all right, well, the minute that I gatekeep myself from those experiences, I no longer grow as a human.
Yeah.
How do you then overcome that initial fear? Because I think a lot of people listening to the podcast probably have a similar feeling as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are a couple of books on mastery. Of course, I know you got one you love, and I got one by Robert Greene that I think is fantastic. But when it comes to mastery in anything, the very first stage is awkward. So the first stage is supposed to be awkward and unfamiliar. So if you go, well, I guess, I'm going to try. I'm scared to fail, but what if I go try a thing. First of all, there is no try. Yoda got that right. Trying is a deflecting mechanism to not take responsibility. So there's no try. So all my clients do, they're not allowed to use the word try.
Well, I tried to fix that. I was like, but you didn't.
Yeah, because you tried.
Yeah.
So
like,
you actually
you
created your own resistance by saying the word try. Think about it.
I'm going
Just
to try.
saying the word try created my own resistance.
Well, you basically said I can't do it.
Right. I made
made
myself an excuse before I even went to do it.
Yeah.
So there is no try, there's only choose. So if you choose to do something new, embrace the awkward and unfamiliar, because that means you're dead on. You're on the right path.
Yeah.
So if you show up and you're like, hey, I want to take up the game of golf, and I go to swing, I'm like, this is so awkward, and I feel really embarrassed. And there's nothing to feel embarrassed about. Awkward and unfamiliar is fantastic.
That's what we did with Jamie in his first lesson about 6 weeks ago. I was like, hey, we're going to hit it this way. All right? We're just going to hit it right.
Every
like,
swing
right of
was
right.
awkward and unfamiliar.
Like they were so far right. We just let him hit it right for 20 minutes.
Can you think of something when you first started coaching me that was kind of like something that you were just like, all right, let's just do this? Because I feel like I looked back at my first golf swing with you in my first lesson. I remember seeing it, and I was like, that swing is god awful.
It's funny. I don't know that I do see it that way.
Really?
Yeah, just because in all of my emails that we put out, I just believe people can do hard stuff.
Yeah.
Just go on YouTube and type in people doing awesome things.
Right,
and there'll be
right.
a 20-minute montage
Right.
of you're going, how did somebody learn how to do
Right.
that?
Yep.
Have you heard of Tom Thumb?
Yeah.
The stuff he can do with his voice, he sounds like a trumpet. He can play an entire orchestra just out of his voice.
Oh, yeah.
He's the elite of the elite. And you can't see it. It's not like he can look in a mirror, maybe see how his mouth moves a little bit, but to me, voice is phenomenal because you can't see any of it.
Yeah.
It's all inside.
Yes.
There's a little bit of breathing technique you can maybe look down here, but people can do amazing things.
Yeah, I agree. But again,
they're
they can do
limited.
amazing
started
things. But it started
with
correct.
awkward and unfamiliar.
Right.
The second
Correct.
stage is boredom. So the second stage to
Okay.
mastery is actually boredom. You know you're on the path to mastery if you start doing something. You're like, oh my gosh, do I seriously have to go do this again? Scott, you told me to hit 100 balls. This is boring.
Yeah.
If you get to the place where you're doing it and it starts to feel boring, that's the second stage, because now it's dropping into your subconscious. And once you get to do it, now the other
That's
thing,
the longest phase.
it is.
too.
It is, and there are
lovely.
and there's
That's where you're.
That's
That's
where
where
I'm
you're
at.
at right now with this new movement.
that's
it's like,
good.
oh, okay, can I do it a different? I was like, no, you got to stay right there,
And you
just-
keep him there, right?
Right.
And the brain says, no, I want to. I want to go do the other thing.
See your face.
No,
It's so great.
And this is it. This is how we do 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 it. And once you do that long enough, the moment happens where suddenly your brain has an aha and goes, wait a second, maybe I can create from this.
Ugh. And that's where my brain wants to live all the time.
Of course, we all do, because we all want mastery.
Right.
But the masters now, that's why a master always has its own signature. That's why anybody who's a master does it their way. Every time you talk about any master in golf, what's the nuance and subtlety of that guy and the way he hits it and how he hits it and why he approaches the ball the way he does? Every master has their own thing.
And they're all different.
And they're all different.
There may be some threads of similarity,
Right.
and their physics line up very similar at
Right.
the bottom, but how they get there is entirely different.
Right, which was to me when you and I met for the first time, I was so grateful when you talked about dominant and non-dominant patterns, and when you're like, "Hey, you're 52. Look, if you want to play professional golf, I'll have to strip this whole thing down. We start from nothing. But if you just want to go out and play scratch golf, or you want to play bogey golf, hey, look, I'm just going to work with your non-dominant patterns, and we're going to fix some things, and you're going to go hit the ball." And I was like, "Let's start there."
Yeah.
That. First of all, you gave me hope. It was not like, hey, in 3 sessions, you're going to actually see a dramatic shift. And I did the first session, of course.
Yeah.
But that was, you were allowing me, you were walking me through a process, and I had to stay in awkward and unfamiliar enough, which I'm still in.
Yeah, because you're still new.
Yeah, because I'm new, and I have to accept that. Now, here's the other thing about when
That's
when
hard.
you're in the awkward and unfamiliar. There is once you start getting in the thing, this is Robert Greene talks about this. Don't start acting like you know what you're doing.
Ooh.
You start to get a little bit of information. You got a little bit of the lingo. You're starting to hang out. You're wearing a golf shirt. You got your shoes. And then, oh yeah, and his whole thing is, do not show up as a poser. If you act like you know what you're doing too fast, you're skipping a process that's meant to happen in your brain.
Yeah.
Don't try to be competitive when you're not competitive yet. He literally says, don't even go out and compete against somebody yet.
So we had this talk a while back about the junior golf with, guys and girls, but in particular the girls. They're like, okay, we're going to jump into middle school golf, and you put them in tournaments and they can't break 120.
We've talked about some of the past 3 podcasts.
You're setting them up,
100%.
and then they all come to me with no. I don't know why my daughter doesn't have any confidence. I was like, because you stuck her in competition when she wasn't ready. You wouldn't give her a guitar,
right.
and she can't play 3 chords and stick her up on stage.
So good, Scott.
You wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But we, for whatever reason in golf, we do that. To sit there and they go play basketball. We got a girls' basketball program. I get, in high school, you kind of have to have some sort of structure as a team, but, we're just not preparing them to be able to perform, and they become
The other thing is a team sport is different than an individual sport.
I would agree with that.
When you're with a team sport, you are benefiting from the mastery that's happening around you.
Yeah.
Right?
And you can hide a little bit.
You can hide a little bit, and sometimes there's a little fake it till you make it in that. I'm sure there's an interesting principle in there. But when it comes to an individual sport, when it comes to now again, if you're interested in mastery and playing at a high level, accept this awkward unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important part of the process.
Since this is ingrained in you in your everyday life and you're teaching this, I'm curious in your journey in golf right now. Do you think that will be hard for you to accept as you go through the stages of learning in this game?
It would have when I was in my 30s as the competitor in me. No question. At 52, no, I totally embrace it. I'm totally good with. Okay, this is going to be awkward enough.
You would have attached your identity to how
That's
well
exactly
you did.
right.
Yeah.
I would have been like, I'm an idiot. I would have been embarrassed. I would, and I wouldn't, because that approval thing was a really high mechanism for me. That was a big hook for me back then.
What changed? What was the switch that flipped? Because I do see there's some tendencies in me where I'll tie my success in a task to my personal identity. What detached that for you at the end of the day?
Can you see this personal journey Jack's going through right now?
It's good.
Well, I think
It's so good.
I think a lot of people are also on this journey too.
I think you're right.
We're all on
We're
this,
all on it.
Jack, at one level. There's Joseph Campbell talks a lot about the hero's journey. And any story is told in rising cycles of tension, right? We all live a version of this. We're going to go through this like we talked about, right? Here's this thing. First thing that happens is I'm called to do a thing. And as soon as I feel this thing to do it, what's the first response? No, I'm not going. This is every movie. This is all of us. It happens in real life. You're called to do a thing. The first response is, dear God, no. Then what happens is you reluctantly, you're thrown into it, or you're pushed into it, or you finally go into it, and now you're on this long journey of discovery that's full of awkwardness, unfamiliarity, tension, ambiguity, uncertainty. You're being exposed. And eventually what happens, again, you watch this happen in any film, except for independent films, but your typical film, you watch this hero's journey, and then he comes face to face with the fact that there's more in him that he realized, and the thing happens. There's this climactic moment where he saves the day, or he accomplishes the thing, or he hits the ball, or whatever, and then he also realizes what I thought the thing was not really the thing. I learned something about me that I was meant to learn this thing. And you have this epilogue, you have this moment at the end of the film, or this kind of soft moment of reflection, and that was nice. And they took the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the big warehouse, and they roll out, and Indiana walks down the steps. You have an epilogue, and then guess what happens? The next moment is coming.
Yeah.
The call to the next thing. So the
sequel.
Yeah, right. But that's exactly right.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
we live that in our own lives. You get called to this thing, you do the thing, you go through the cycle, you have often a climactic moment, a dramatic moment. Maybe you have a big capital experience. You make a bunch of cash. I meet a lot of guys in this place. They make a bunch of cash, and now it's like, oh,
what do I do now?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Because I had before it was the burn, it was the run, it was the pursuit. Now I don't have to? What do I do with myself? I mean, that's a massive existential crisis for people.
Do you think that as you and what you do and the people that you've met and even yourself, do you think you've seen people who just have gone on that journey so many times that it's like, you know what, I'm just me and I'm just doing the next thing? Do you think that's kind of the
That's a small percentage, but that to me is the deep work.
Gotcha.
And that is when you see somebody and you go, that guy is you know when you bump into one of these people because the light shines from them so brightly. Like they're just so comfortable in their own skin, and there's a peacefulness around them. But Jack, that is what's happened. They've gone through the cycle enough that there's been a shedding of the ego. In the book, we talk a lot about the ego and the true self. And the ego is built around, the ego is walking around trying not to die. So we're grateful for the ego, keeps us alive. But we only survive in our ego state. Thriving is about coming out above the ego.
So good.
And awakening to who you are in this other reality, this true self. That's that spiritual plane. People have a lot of different language for it. Even psychology has a language for it. But it's that true self, who you are in this higher plane. And then in that place, you're at peace. Some of us only taste it. We have moments. Some of us have long seasons of it. But you find people, they've lived a little bit of life. They've been through some pain. And you do find the people who are awakening to that thing, like, wait a second, this is what's true. And I'm a firm believer that the answers are in everyone.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I'm not going to respond to that last thing you said, but like I've been thinking about, there was a gentleman, gone to a bunch of weddings when I was about your age, and like I was down in Birmingham, and like I had worked at a private club, spent time around a lot of private clubs, and this isn't a knock on the wealthy, but there was a gentleman I met for the first time at a wedding that was family friends with Rebecca. I hadn't met him before. And like we're sitting there waiting for the service to start, and he just starts asking genuine questions about who we are, like who I am, what is it about you. It wasn't the typical, like, what are you going to do for 5 years? Like, you're in the golf business. Like that's not a very profitable business, right? Like there's just all of these like types of threads where like they're all trying to hide, like you can tell how they dress, like even at a wedding, like, are you trying to be the most flashy? Like he was dressed in a nice tux, but the way he talked and interacted with people, you could tell that he was on a different plane than everybody else. Yeah. And you didn't know whether he had $10 or, $100 million.
Yeah.
You're talking about just based off the quality of his questions?
Just based on the quality of his questions,
and
the way
his
he was
essence,
postured.
his aura, the way he is,
Yeah,
right? So it's interesting. So we carry an electrical charge, right? So we are an exchange of energy. We're just dense matter. So this is fascinating. You just go look up a little quantum physics on this. But physics in general. We're an exchange of energy. That's what, at a subatomic level, you're just an exchange of energy. So is this thing, right? We're walking around as dense matter. So it's interesting, spiritual teachers that go, hey, you're the light of the world, it's actually not metaphorical. It's literal. You are a light. This is why we even use some language like, oh my gosh, I really resonated with that guy. That guy's on a different plane. That guy gives me a weird vibe. We say it's metaphorical, but it's actually physiological. We feel something when you're in somebody else's presence.
It's funny when science doesn't want to like touch on that stuff. It's like, actually, there is a spiritual component to everything.
This is where science and spirituality are the exact same.
They go together.
They do.
Yet scientists won't talk about it because it'll disprove their other theories that they've already brought up, right? Because it feels like magic in a bottle. So it feels like something that a genie's telling you, right? Rather than something that you can actually physically prove.
But more and more scientists who are going, okay, the Newtonian model was helpful for us. We wouldn't have got to the moon without it. But the world is bigger than the Newtonian model.
Yeah.
It's not just cause and effect. This idea of what we're learning at a subatomic level is actually coordinating with and reinforcing the spiritual concepts that we have. They're not at war with each other. They actually correlate.
What do you think creates somebody who has an energy, let's just say a positive energy? Like, for example, when I walked in this room, I thought that we meshed well together. I started asking you questions. You started asking me about what I was doing. And I was like, you know what? Like, this is going to be a really fun one. I even said beforehand, I said, no discredit to all the other guests that we have. I said, this is probably going to be one of my favorite podcasts that we've done. What do you think makes a human being vibe like that, if you will?
Jack, he's just a magician and a master manipulator.
Yeah. I hope not.
He's going to pull out a bottle of snake oil from his pocket.
Well, we know that's not true because he's too intuitive. Right? Yeah. So if I came in and you really did sense, wait, there's some weird agenda with this guy, you'd know it.
Totally.
And so part of that intuitive part of you is, and it's interesting, Jack, you're young enough that you still trust it. Some of us have been beaten up by life enough that we stop trusting our intuition. We have this gut sense. See, we've got intellectual knowing, and you got this deep gut knowing. There are two different kinds of knowing. We were talking about Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and you were coaching an athlete, and you're like, man, there's something about this athlete. I can't totally put it into words, but I sense, like, there's this deep...
That's part of my question.
Right?
Yeah.
There's this deep knowing. I know this thing. So that, to me, is we're connecting on another level that we can't totally articulate. Some of it comes from, like, the connection I felt with you when we walked in was some people are open. And you can feel like they're learners, or they long to learn, or they long to grow. They're open to new concepts and ideas. Those people tend to have like an open energy, and it's easy to connect in that. Other people are they've been hurt so much. A lot of people carry trauma. It's still in their body. And because of that trauma, they're protected and they're guarded and they're closed, and it's a little harder to connect. And they're not bad people. They just got hurt. And they probably got hurt pretty bad in their formative years. And so, but it's harder to break through sometimes. And so that may be what you sensed.
And I was reading the back of your book here, Going Green, which you guys should check it out if you haven't already.
Well, we rebranded it. That was the first one.
What's
it's
it
now
called?
called The Thrivalist Handbook.
The Thrivalist Handbook. There
Yes,
we go.
yes.
There we go. And where can they find it? Amazon.
Yeah,
Amazon.
yeah.
Perfect. I was reading the back, and I was seeing how you said that you can give insights to how to make those deeper relationships and make them somewhat quickly as well. What do you think? I feel like it's easy to connect with somebody who has an open sense of energy, right? But what would you say to the people who perhaps are face to face in their jobs, who perhaps are make friends not as easily as others? What would you say to make those deeper connections quicker with people who might be more closed off?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's all about trust and emotional safety.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So if I believe...
Ding, 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 ding. Yahtzee, can you say that again? Because we could say that 3 more times.
Yeah, right. This is fundamental to the whole entire human experience.
Yep.
It is all about trust and emotional safety.
And that doesn't mean you can just cry in front of somebody.
No, emotional safety means you can share something from a vulnerable place, which, by the way, saying what you want is vulnerable.
Yep.
You can share with this other person, and they know how to hold the space for you. They're not there to fix you. They're not there to rescue you. They're not there to be your Messiah.
You can say no in that space
that's right.
too.
They're that person is there going, hey, there's something going on in you, and the hold the space is a term to just the idea that I don't have to fix anything. I can just participate in your story with you.
Yeah.
And some of us, when it's not safe, is you share with somebody and they're immediately defensive, or they immediately hijack your story. If you've ever been with this, somebody asks you a question, they go, tell me about such and such. And you're like, well, and they're like, well, that reminds me of me too. I've been, and off you're like, I don't actually think you wanted to, I don't think, you just were waiting to add commentary.
Yeah,
right. And so that person's not safe because I didn't actually trust that you cared. I think you were that was a setup for you to talk. And so then what happens is, and by the way, if you grow up in a home like this, then the child is taught pretty quickly, I've got some massive dominant personality or narcissistic personality or whatever, then I'll just shut down.
That's so interesting.
Right?
Yep.
And so that then shows up as an adult.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you might meet someone as an adult who's guarded or closed off, and it's just because they weren't offered the gift of a great deal of emotional safety as a child. So a great gift to someone is to go, hey, I'm here, I'm present to you, I have no agenda, I don't have anything to fix, this is shadow and light, like, you are who you are.
Could the same theory be applied to somebody who's just like, I don't know, perhaps insecure in themselves, but like not necessarily that they weren't given that emotional level, but perhaps they always feel like they have something to prove?
Yeah.
I feel like for me, when I've met people, whether it's my age or older, they've been at a place where it's like it's never about being on an equal playing field. In real estate, we talk about being on equal business stature.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes it feels like that power dynamic can switch back and forth. And I feel like there's multiple reasons for somebody being closed off. Would you say that's one of the only reasons, or do you think that it's broader than just what you were just talking about?
I think I think everybody takes a wound in your formative years. We all, and everybody buys into a lie. I've not yet met the exception. I've had my dirt in the hands of human beings' lives for 30 years. I haven't met anybody that's escaped this.
Would you think it's about how they respond to that, perhaps?
How they were impacted, how they respond, and then it just shows up in patterns. So probably, for you, when it, Scott, for you as a coach, I watched you watching me swing the club. You're immediately looking for patterns. Pretty quickly, you'll identify, at some level,
He doesn't know how early I actually identify those.
I know.
Yeah. Maybe when I walked in the door, right?
Oh, yep.
Probably when you got out of your car.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we all, these patterns, we fall into these patterns. And again, the ego keeps us alive. So some of these patterns might be, I'm really fearful. So I've got a friend, he's super fearful. So he's in business. He's got redundancy on redundancy on redundancy because he's just afraid. Fear is his primary driver. I got another friend, shame is the primary driver. I'm not good enough. And so I'm constantly working from I'm not good enough. Insecurity could show up in either place. So in relation to your question, I think we all have a version of insecurity. The question is just how it manifests. And it manifests in everybody differently. This is the benefit of doing some of the personality tests that are out there because there are patterns. The DISC or the Myers-Briggs. I work a lot with Enneagram. It's 9 different types. And so you can see patterns. I have patterns of proclivity. Everybody is nuanced and full of subtlety. They're their own person. Yeah. But there are patterns, and I can identify patterns. Those would be, I think, the dominant patterns that I'm noticing, right? Yeah. And then I got to climb into their world to find the nuances and subtleties in the non-dominant. But they show, and so at one level, Jack, I think we all have an insecurity, and then how does it show up? My insecurity might be I get really quiet and I don't talk. Well, another insecurity might be I'm really big and loud and I'm going to be brash and I'll be crass and be the jokester.
Yeah. Or be the smartest person in the room.
I'll be really, really smart. Or I'll be the good boy. I'll make sure I do everything right.
Follow all the rules.
So it just shows up differently.
Scott, talking about tendencies, I want you to tell Jamie the story when we were on number 4, the hill at number 4, when we were watching people tee off on number 8. And I kind of want you to tell him just how you pick up on those patterns. And we were talking about earlier before the show started.
I pick up on them.
Well, we were talking about before the show started about how you can't, you just pick up, you've seen enough to where you can just tell. And I'm curious, Jamie, before Scott tells that story, are you somebody who can, for example, on the Enneagram test, could you look at somebody and be like, yeah, that one's a 2, that one's a 3, that one's a 7?
It takes a little interaction, but it doesn't take long to notice some of the patterns. Sure.
Gotcha.
You get on the correct side of the wheel most of the time. But I don't know how I do it. So one instance was there's a lot of dynamic features. I can't remember what my Myers-Briggs is. I had it done with a counselor sitting with Rebecca. We were in some marriage counseling, and he was looking at Rebecca Rebecca, Scott literally feels everything with his entire body. She's like, I feel too. He's like, no. This is a different, it's he's very, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm a feeler. It's
sensory?
She's like, well, yeah, he's touchy feels. It's not touchy feel. It's an entire, when I told...
it's how he interacts with the world.
No, that's an empath. You were absorbing literally all that energy.
And so, when I had that player we were talking about earlier, that I was like, they have it. I said, I can tell you what to do with video over the internet, whatever, but I need to see it and I can feel it. I can feel what I need to do. And so what was happening, we were out on number 4. And so 4, 7, and 8 are in this little triangle over there. And so we're not in the way of any of them. And these guys are walking off the green on 7. And that's all I saw. I saw them walk off the green, put their clubs in their bag, and get in the cart and drive. And I was like, all right, Jack, that guy's going to look like this. That guy's going to look like this. This guy's going to do that. And
sure enough,
all 100%. 4 of them.
Wow.
Dead on.
100%.
Now, there's 2 other levels we've gone. I gave a lesson to
my buddy.
To your buddy with my eyes closed.
My buddy was having a hard time hitting his driver. And so I was like, well, let's go hit some balls at Franklin Bridge. I think Scott will be there. So I texted Scott and I'm like, hey, can you take 5-10 minutes and work with my buddy for a bit? And he said, I will, with one exception. I'm going to do it with my eyes closed.
And we've been talking about it.
I want to practice doing this. Yeah.
We had talked about it because I'm the kingpin. like I'm at the pinnacle of like there's nobody over me.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point in my career from a teaching standpoint, there won't be anybody over me.
It sounds
to coach
arrogant
me.
for people who might be listening, and maybe even for you, Jamie, but I promise you when he says that, he says it with like such humility, and I've seen him work in such a way where it's just I totally believe it.
Energetically, I don't hear arrogance. What I hear is just
Interesting.
a casual confidence, and it's an observer who's noticed what he's done and has accepted his mastery.
And I think you are aware enough to make that claim where somebody else might be like, well, he sounds like he sounds pretty arrogant
because if
in
it
that.
tags their insecurity,
There we go.
if he reminds them of someone else, if they wish they were him,
Yeah.
jealousy often provokes insecurity or transference.
There we go.
If you sound like my dad or my other coach or sometimes I project on you the pain that I had with that person.
Yep.
So good. All right, sorry, resume.
Yeah. So, but I told Jack that because like we had been talking about it. I want to give a lesson with my eyes closed because I can hear with my ears what the ball did. People are like, well, yeah, that one sounded solid. I was like, no, we're not talking solid. Like I can tell you if it faded 5 yards, 8 yards, whatever. Like I can tell you what the ball did with my eyes closed, back turned to you. And so I said, I need checks on me. What better way to do that than to remove one of my features, remove my eyes? 90% of our information that we take in from the world is from our eyes. So if I remove that, I then engage. I have to engage everything else and see what I know. And I might totally fail. I'm totally fine with that. I need to have checks on me. And so by doing that, like, only thing I saw was him walk up and I shook his hand. So I did have some minor context, but I didn't know what the swing actually looked like. I could have an idea, but I just listened to some shots with my eyes closed, put my hands on him. I said, make a backswing for me. And I just put my hands on certain parts of his body to like sense where the thing may be. And then I said, all right, I want you to start down. And I was like, that's it right there. All right. Then I knew what to fix. Got him to do it. And then he hit these hooks for a little bit. I was like, it's hooking, right? Yeah. I said, all right. And then at that point I knew by basing on where I placed my hands, I needed to step in and just change one thing in his setup. And we were done. And so I went in, changed that one thing, and at this point I opened my eyes. As soon as I looked at Jack, I was like, that's going to be it. And then just hitting pellets. And then you all went out and played like 3 or 4 holes, didn't you, right after?
Yeah, we did, and he hit a few really well. I will say that I've played with him recently, and he's back to hitting the hook, but it's only because he didn't practice. So what's been going on?
But like, so that was a
I will
nice
say
challenge.
that when he showed up, I believe he was hitting slices.
Yeah, he's hitting it to the right.
Yeah, I believe so. It's like you've already fixed one trait, and now it's all about the next one.
And so, like, where are my checks on me? And this winter, I did this. It took me way more time. And like, if we look at the amount of dollars I'm getting paid by the hour to do all this extra work behind the scenes, I did 14-page evals on 34 adult students. And so the eval has every position of the swing. It's basically like a scientific study. We've got video. We have their TrackMan data with where the ball was hit with 4 different clubs, all of their injury history, all of this context. I don't have the in-person interaction. I had somebody else film it. So I don't get to use that. I have no...
Right.
So I'm trying to go and pull back as far as I can, like what is actually true without any influence from me. And so I go through in detail every position. It took me 90 minutes to complete every eval. So you do that times 34 people.
Yeah. That took some time.
I mean, it's a whole extra week of work. Well, it took me a month to do it. Well, yeah, I have a full-time job.
Right.
Like,
why did you do it?
I didn't think it was going to take that long. But like once I get in it, I can't half do it. Like it's not in my personality to half do it. And so it took me more time. I had to let go of like being worried that they were going to get it in time. It's basically an MRI on their golf game.
Right.
And so every position was detailed out and with no opinions. It was like left thumb pointed to right shoulder, right thumb pointed to nose. Now typically somebody would go, we have a strong left hand, a weak right hand. I'm not assigning any rightness or wrongness to anything. I'm just stating what is there factually. Here's what it is. And so going through that process, I was able to, some of these people had already taken lessons from me. Some haven't taken any at all. I was able to recognize certain things that I tend to leave alone. And so I'm catching myself on threads of where I was off. So yeah, was it expensive in terms of my time to do that and my energy? And I was exhausted after this last month and a half it took me to complete it. Yeah. But I think
You gave
that
yourself your own
time,
master's class.
I took myself through that whole process and was able to pull those threads and catch where I was off and how to communicate that better. And then when I went in and started teaching, I was able to do my normal adapting, and some of the things I decided I'm not even going to go that route. I'm going to actually go this route.
So for people who want to know about mastery, listening to this right here, this is a phenomenal example of what a master does. A master puts limits and constraints on his own mastery to identify how can he do it better. How can he do it different? That's what true masters do. You go, well, you're already at the top of your game. Like, well, just coast. A master doesn't coast. A master looks for new ways to create limits, to create constraints. It's why you see this even in martial arts. Like, okay, this guy's got his arm tied behind, or he's gonna break it with his forehead instead of his hand. Like, there's always this. A master is looking to continue to push and excel and grow and expand and see. That's mastery. So anybody who's like, I want to be a master, to me, Scott, you're giving us a wonderful example of what intuitively happens when you're right there smack dab in the middle of your craft and you want to continue to expand who you are.
It's funny that he says that. Like, I appreciate the compliment too. We were closing on the house the other day, sitting in the room with, there's 5 of us in there, and the lawyer across the table who's handing me the papers to sign, she's left-handed, and she's signing everything left-handed. Now, all I've seen is her take 3 steps in and sit there left-handed. That's it. And I remember texting Jack and a few other guys. I said, well, she's left-handed, and I had to stop her midway. I was like, I'm sorry. This is a really random, totally unrelated question, but you played a bunch of sports right-handed as a kid, didn't you? I can't tell you where that.
Oh,
I'm sitting there.
gosh.
I'm sitting there thinking, I have to ask her. I think I know.
And I love you. Like, I don't even know how I know this, but I'm pretty sure I know this.
Yeah. And she said, yeah, like virtually every sport I played right-handed as a kid, and I played a lot of them. I was like, I knew she played sports.
Oh,
all I saw was
my
take 3
gosh.
steps in, sit there, write everything left-handed. And somebody was like, oh, that's because this is why you don't share certain things with certain people. I shared it with somebody, and they were like, oh, they're left-handed, and when she was younger, there weren't a lot of kids playing left-handed in sports. I was like, that wasn't it. I'm sorry. It wasn't a step of logic.
Yes.
It was a step
curious.
of total intuition
Yeah.
and sensing, like, I just know that she was right-handed, and I can tell you what her golf swing looks like, and she hasn't done any sort of large enough movement for me to see what her arms and hands do.
Okay, so that was what I was going to ask, is because I was thinking, all right, well, how would I feel that if I was you? And I was thinking,
You
well,
can't.
I feel like you might have like somewhat of a weaker left hand rather than the right.
The thing is, I see way more than that. The brain's processing somewhere, depending on the piece of information you look at, and
This is
depending
your
on how you
favorite
define
stat.
depending on how you define a bit of information, somewhere on the order of 10 to 50 million bits of information every single second. And that's why people go, oh, you saw that, or you saw that one thing. I was like, it's all of it. Like, my brain's literally sucking in all of it. And the day that I could tell the sound of a golf shot, some of you have heard this story a ton of times, but like, you haven't heard it, which is kind of cool. I'm sitting there, and Hank had taught for over 50 years at that point. I'm just sitting there, and like, he would always write notes at the end of lessons, and for several years, he'd be finishing up, 5 minutes left in the lesson. He's just making their notes, and he said, that was a great one. And like, I'm sitting next to him, like, I'm looking up at him, like, trying to look.
He
at his
wasn't
eyes.
watching, right?
I was like, "You're not watching. You can't see it." Blah 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 blah. And then one year, it's about 7 years in, finishing up with a young girl, Katie Tangy, turning around, about to give a lesson to Grayson Gladden. These moments like stand out, right? And I'm sitting there. I'm looking at Grayson with my back turned to Katie because I'm about to start with Grayson. And I said, "Grayson, did that drew like 5 yards, didn't it?" She said, "Yeah." I was like, the first one I was like, oh, whatever. I kept talking to her, and Katie kept hitting. I was like, that one started a little right and stayed over there, right? Yeah. That one faded, didn't it? Yeah. I was like, he could hear it.
That's when you put it together. That's
like,
hysterical.
he could hear it. He knew what the swing looked like by the sound. And the only time I've had that without knowing anything about the student was I was in here giving a lesson in this corner with my back turned to the driving range, looking at the student, right-handed. And Ken Mayer was sitting back here, who's helped us get this whole studio up. And I stopped the student. It just stood out to me. And I looked at Ken. I was like, I can tell you what the swing looks like. I could just tell by the sound. I said it had to be somebody who's older, who can't move very well, and their hands go like this with a little wedge shot. I can tell you by the sound. I can tell you exactly where it got hit in the face and how the club interacted with the turf. And I didn't know. I was kind of afraid to look. I was like, I bet I'm wrong. I have to be wrong.
It's like the show Limitless. He takes the pill and suddenly he can see colors. Yeah.
And so like I stick my head out, and sure enough, the guy had to be 280 pounds, old, overweight, probably in his late 60s, and just this little thing in his hands in his forward swing. I was like, that was the swing. It's the only time I've been able to do it without seeing it.
Wow.
Just off my ears.
But
and without having context.
This is Gretzky. This is all the great ones. I mean, Gretzky says, look, I wasn't the greatest athlete in the world, but I knew when the puck was hit, I knew where it would go. I knew exactly where it would be at all times on the ice. This is
millions of reps.
Yeah, and that's it.
You know the beautiful thing about Gretzky, the Gretzky example, is that even now with some of the greats, Ovechkin, Crosby, some of the guys who will be forever cemented in the sport, will never even get close to
crazy.
Gretzky. And so for me, like hearing Scott say that, all the things that he just said, you can be like, well, Scott, like, come on, like you don't really like see that. But with Gretzky, like he's got the statistics to prove it. And so that kind of like cements to me that people like Scott or people who have interactions with music or however you may see it, you're like, oh, that's real. Yeah. That's something.
Yep.
Well, and it's like, I don't know, like I'm always trying to learn something new. Like that's one of my, if you use the Strengths Finder assessment, learner's one of my top 5.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know, I just enjoy learning stuff. And I was at Pinehurst 2 weeks ago for an awards conference, and there are 2 other guys presenting. One's the 2013 National Teacher of the Year. Now, he doesn't teach tour players, which is pretty rare for a guy to win that award. But like the award's starting to shift a little bit towards like what it is what does it mean to be a teacher. So it's the identity of that shifting a little bit, which is good, I think. It's definitely easier if you've got tour players to win that award. Right. It's the highest award you can win. And I've used 2 of the things that he presented there, and you know, you see other teaching pros, they're like, oh, that, but like it can't be that. Like that's so like basic. Like you can't do that. Like there's got to be a better way. And you don't like. I'm going. I've used 2 of the main things that he talked about multiple times, and they've worked every time. But I'm not like it's not in my like I wasn't afraid to just go ahead and go try it. If it doesn't work, who cares?
Right.
Because I'll give it a shot. Yeah, I'll try it. Like I'm good enough. If it doesn't work, I can redirect, maneuver the lesson, and the student never think it's something different. They think it's the same thing in the same language, but it's we're just gonna do it a different way or try this a different way. And so like, I wasn't afraid of that. Yeah. And this other gentleman, I did some stuff on the mindset. He works with professional athletes all over the world, and so like the stuff's been fantastic, but it's not mine. Yeah, but I'm learning it, and it'll become mine.
And that's exactly right.
That's different. That's unique to me.
And then it'll have its own expression as it comes out of you. Right.
And so, like, I don't know. People are so afraid of that awkwardness and like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong. I remember Hank telling me early when I first started teaching, and he first got me certified to teach, and he's like, Scott, go ahead and fix it. I'm like, but he said, you're gonna make people worse. It's a part of the learning process, and it sucks. Good. And they're paying you money for it, but they're taking a risk. Yeah. And like there's no other way for you to learn than to mess people up. But like he trained us so much, and the training was so in depth that the number of people that are a year into teaching that somebody else would make worse. The number of people that I would make worse would be a lot shorter. Plus, if I got stuck, I had somebody with 50 years of experience who I could lean into. He used to say, you can't screw it up so bad that I can't fix it. And so like I used to be afraid to ask him for help because it looks like weakness. It's actually not. It's a sign of security and strength.
That's exactly right.
But
Jamie, I've got a question for you, man. So Scott does this winter program called Cracking the Code, where he takes a limited group of individuals and has them practice all throughout the winter in hopes that when spring comes around, you'll be exponentially better, right? My question to you would be, that seems like a perfect place for somebody like you to come speak to individuals like that. And so I'm curious, when you're preparing to speak to a group of people, let's say you're going to be speaking to that Cracking the Code group, how would your preparation and how would your keynote speech start or go or theorize in your opinion?
I just spoke. There's a company called D1. I don't know if you've interacted with any of the Will and Dan. All those guys are amazing people. And I just spoke they had a national thing in Dallas. And as I sat with Will and Dan and we were preparing for it and talked about, hey, these are franchisee owners and all, what do you want to talk about? And ultimately, and I've done a lot of coaching with those guys and their company, and it came back to, hey, can you go back to those triangles, which are what we talked about are in the book? Can you go back to that? Because fundamentally, whatever the thing is, whether it's a skill, whether it's business, whether it's whatever, it all comes back to your relationship with yourself. So you talked about, hey, when it comes to insecurity, you're just talking about, hey, you don't have to be afraid. If I'm insecure, if I'm afraid, if I live as the victim, then I don't have any power, which means I'm going to show up in the world reacting. And the magic is when I stop reacting and I start being intentional. So I want to be the activator, not the person who's reacting. If I'm always reacting, usually my ego's in play. I'm in fight, flight, or freeze because I'm reacting and I just want to stay alive.
Freeze sucks.
And freeze sucks. It's horrible. And which, by the way, is my dominant place to go. I'm not a big fighter. I don't run a lot. I freeze.
I do too.
And while we got three of us. Yeah, if I roll over and play dead and avoid this, right, it's going to go away, right? No, it's just going to get bigger, and you're going to deal with it at some point. But that's our ego that's just trying to keep us alive. When I get outside of that, and I get out of that victim, and I move up, so in our language, into the green triangle. Green triangle is about ownership, boundaries, and negotiation. The power position, and by power, I don't mean power over, I mean empowered, is when I take ownership. When do I go, wait a second, no matter what has happened to me? Because here's the thing, everybody's been victimized, right? We've all had moments of betrayal or maybe abuse or whatever. Therapists say, especially when they have abuse victims sitting in front of them, hey, the moment you were abused, you were a victim. And the next moment, you were not.
I remember telling Jamie one of our lessons, he said that same thing, and I was reminded of what a counselor told me when I was working through depression, anxiety, and stress. And I didn't have any boundaries. I didn't set boundaries. I just let everybody run all over my boundaries all the time, and so I had none. And so then the boundaries I don't have over here, run over these boundaries over there, and all my relationships go to crap. And after he had developed some trust, we're back to that trust thing, he said, Scott, at some point you're no longer a victim, you're a volunteer. And I was like, oh, that one hurts.
Yeah.
But I had enough
The
trust.
truth will hurt you, but first it'll piss you
That's
off.
where we moved, but that's where we moved to the empowerment part.
Yeah.
And it's okay, I don't have to try to pick a boundary. He started small. We talked about Ramsey a little bit.
Yeah.
Ramsey understood human motivation of $1,000 in the savings account. I have all these. I don't care about all the debts, and then we're gonna knock off the smallest. one. It might be $50.
Because we're back to awkward and unfamiliar. Take one step. Make one choice. Choose not to be a victim and go, I'm going to make a choice today. Yeah, I'm carrying scars and wounds from a thing, but I'm in charge of my life. I'm not Otherwise, I live at the mercy of other people. That's why victimization is hell. It's hell being a victim because you're at the mercy of maybe whether or not somebody else. How many times have you tried to change the external behavior of another person so that you could feel better?
You lose every time.
Because
you can't do it.
There's no power. So instead, I remember one of the first things I had a counselor say to me too early on was, hey, if you're in a conversation and the conversation is escalated, at any point in time you could go, hey, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to push pause and step away. And first of all, I was like you. I was like, wait, you're allowed to do that? So first I was like, that's okay to set a boundary. And I remember coming back to him and I'm like, hey, I tried that thing you told me. That person escalated. I told them they needed to stop yelling. He's like, yeah, it's not what I told you. I'm like, no, I told them to stop. He's like, did it work? No. He's like, yeah, because that's not a boundary. That's you attempting behavior modification on the other human being. Good luck, especially with another adult.
You didn't say
off.
I'm out. You didn't just stop and say I'm out.
No, instead of saying, you know what, this doesn't work for me, I'm going to step away.
Well, and it reminds me, it's so much fun when we tie back to old podcasts.
100%.
When we had Ken and Don on here.
Yeah.
And he's in, he does firearms training and self-defense.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me about this guy. Yeah.
And so he...
badass.
He said...
He's insane.
You win every fight that you don't get into.
That's good.
And so most of what they teach is avoidance of those things. And Jocko's talked about it too. somebody comes up and asks, like, they're ready to fight you,
Yeah.
so I can just run.
Yeah.
Well, because here's
Like,
the thing
that's
too.
their first instinct. Like,
Right.
I don't know anything about this person, but I
But
can
when
run.
you're in their line
I'm
of
out.
work,
I have a choice. I don't have to fight.
Right.
when you're in their line of work, though, it's two things. It's binary. You either you live or you die.
Yeah. Right.
And so what he's saying is like, you win every fight you don't get
Yeah.
into. It's like, oh, I never thought about that. But that's interesting because, and I'm curious if you can add into this, Jamie, is because when you're dealing with a binary, it feels very easy to pick which one.
Right.
And so I feel like some people get tied into a knot of infinite possibilities.
Right. And yeah, you're right. So let's go back to the ego, right? So
That's why I
we're
love this
grateful
book.
because the ego keeps us alive. So we're back to like, thank you, because there's a moment where you may keep me alive. It's a binary choice right now, and I bless that. You kept me alive for a long time. It's for that old evolutionary part of our brain, the limbic system, the lizard brain, the monkey brain, whatever you want to call it. That is my fight, flight, or freeze, and it's going to keep me alive. Thank you. And
Except when it doesn't.
yeah, and I won't. I will not. I may survive, but I won't thrive in that place.
That's correct.
Because it's just survival. So we honor the fact that it's survival, but it's just. But that's all it is. So surviving then means I get to take responsibility and I get to take ownership over my life. And what I love about what these guys talked about is like I get to own my own choice. Running is an option,
Yeah.
right? I get to make a choice. A really good. This would be a good exercise for listeners. If anybody's out there and you feel stuck and you're like, I feel stuck in my marriage, I feel stuck in my job, I feel stuck in this thing. This is a great question to ask yourself. Is this an I have to or an I get to?
I love that.
Do I have to? Because if I have to, that carries a whole lot of energy with it.
Mm-hmm.
Or do I get to? Do I have to be married or do I get to be married? Trust me, you will show up way differently as a spouse,
Yeah.
depending on which energy you.
Well, and
engage.
that decision is
shifts your-
binary, right? Because like one thing that I've asked myself in my job is I've been like, oh man, I have to make 50 calls today, and then I immediately switch and I'm like, you know what? I get to make 50 calls today, and that is the binary choice. I feel like.
Yeah, well,
Well, you're
binary
flipping your
or
mindset.
or it is flipping the mindset, or the infinite possibilities are. Or I'll make 25 calls and I won't hit my goals, or I'll quit
Yeah.
my job, or right. So it's binary in terms of the mindset, but possibilities are still endless.
Correct, but I feel like sometimes if you can simplify it enough to where like, oh man, that is the catalyst that I need to make a change.
Well,
Yeah.
I think,
make an
I think
action.
that ties to the way your book is structured too.
Because it's ownership. So it's an invitation to ownership. I get to choose my mindset at any given moment of any given day. I get to choose. I get to. I don't have to, but I get to. And if I make this choice, it's going to change how I experience life.
Yeah.
And that choice sits in front of us at any minute of any day.
You know, it's interesting when people have, talked about us like doing these podcasts late. Like Jack gets to come do the podcast.
Yeah.
Like we both enjoy this, and this is therapeutic for me in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Of like, this is probably the most real version of me. A lot of times is here because like it's just there's nobody else. I don't
Yeah.
have to prove anything to
Yeah.
anybody, and I think it's helped me not have to prove anything in my normal context.
It's good.
But
And for me, it's been a way to where I feel like a lot of people. I think you might be able to tell I'm very comfortable in front of people, but for me, it's been a way to see people in the clubhouse and like, oh, you're the podcast guy, and it makes me feel like I've got a larger impact, or I have. I'm known more. I feel more seen, more known, more
Yeah.
heard, and then it opens me up to then be more free with how I interact, how I am here on this piece of property, and it's just like it's been a very freeing thing.
And does it allow you to feel more confident as you walk up to people?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one
100%.
fundamental aspect of the human experience is we long to be seen and known.
But the difference, and what's interesting on the podcast form, is that sometimes I will say it's given me definitely more confidence to go and talk to people because it gives me that more credibility, right? They feel like they know me. But in the same way, it's just us three in the camera today. Like it doesn't feel like I'm giving a keynote speech in front of 1,000 people,
Yeah,
which you've
yeah,
probably
yeah.
done. So
Yeah.
it's like that. I think that's maybe a difference maker.
it's funny about this choice thing. Like the thing I hated as a kid and even in college was getting chosen to like have to answer. Hated that.
Why?
Like when because I didn't know if I was going to get it right or wrong and what everybody else was going to think about me if I screw it up,
yeah,
right?
that mattered then.
I don't know. And so,
If you didn't tell, he knew the answer to your question.
yeah, I know,
before
I know. And so, but thinking about the mentors that I've had over the years, my college coach, I think, started the fixing of this process because golf demands more of like school time than any other sport because you leave on a Sunday, you leave on a Saturday, so you don't miss any school. You do a practice round on Sunday. You're gone Monday, Tuesday, playing your tournament. You're back on. So you miss 3 days. So you might, if for one of those classes, you might miss it twice in a week.
Wow.
And you got exams and all that. And so like, he told us, you're going to sit in the front of every class. You get there early for your classes in that first week. You get there, you sit in the front because that changes the teacher's perspective. You hand them he hands us a piece of paper. These are the things that may happen these are the days I might miss if I qualify. And then once you've qualified, and qualifying was always ahead of time enough where like the teacher, professor got enough days, 4 or 5 days. Either I take the test early, I make it up, I take a different one, all that sort of stuff. But he also said, I want you to ask questions or go into the professor's office and ask each professor once a month. He said, even if you acing the class and you don't have a question, make one up.
Go anyway.
And so for me, that process became not that I had a choice. Like me raising my hand said, I get to choose when I get called on.
Good.
Plus, when I start raising my hand, they're not going to call on me more often. They're not going to call on me.
That was always my hack in school. I would always volunteer, so I never got called on.
And so because it feels out of control. And so like it feels like I'm the victim again and I'm just stuck here playing the victim all the time. And so when I went to this thing at Pinehurst, and I've been doing this in the last number of presentations and teaching summits that I've gone to, it's like, have any volunteers? Like, now I'm scared. I do not want to raise my hand. Like every time I know that's coming, like if I had a whoop on, I mean, my heart rate's probably in the 160s, like no problem like that. But I'm like, I have to do this. Like this is
it's a power position. What your coach taught you was, again, did you notice it wasn't reactive? Now it's intentional.
Yeah.
And the intentional gives you a position of confidence because I'm choosing, as opposed to I'm living at the arbitrary, who knows when, I'm in the ambiguity, they may or may not ask me. That's that level of uncertainty can often create this disharmony or this fear. Yeah. And so what he was saying was, here's the way to get around that. Also, by the way, you're going to create an emotional connection with this professor who, in the subtleties and nuances of grading papers and allowing exceptions to the rule, is going to have a connection with you and go, you know what? You've been responsible. You've came. You've talked to me, right? You've come. You've talked.
You've been proactive.
Yeah. And so as a result, you've built respect. And now suddenly, when you're gone, it's seen through a different light.
We didn't make any sense of that when
you're doing it. Interesting.
It's just what we do, and we would hear our teammates go like, "Oh, professor hates when I can't be there on the Friday." I'm like, I don't have any problems with professors. We never had a single problem with a professor ever.
Isn't that interesting?
I was there.
Zero victimization.
None.
Total ownership.
And our team unity was like, we had no captains. Natural leaders rise to the surface. We trusted the leaders that came on. We got a vote when new players were coming in. Like, he's like, I'm down to these 2 or 3. Let them come and stay. We had the final say.
Wow.
Because he knew.
That's tremendous leadership.
He trusted. He's now the associate women's head coach at Duke University, who's won 7 of the last 20 national championships.
Not a surprise.
Yeah, that's where he should be.
Yeah.
And like once you're named associate, you know that you're about to take over the head coach.
He was on the podcast too.
Yeah, we had him on.
Oh, very cool.
He's phenomenal. And so, I texted him the other day, one of their girls that graduated there a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. She's now one of the top LPGA players, Leona McGuire. Wow. And I said, you have to be so proud. Like John, we don't call him coach, we call him John. We call him John. And so he said, I'm proud of all of you. Like, he doesn't make a distinction between, like, just because you're famous and you're winning tournaments or top 5ing all the time, or you're over here being an accountant. Like, there's no separation because it's the character traits that you exhibit, not the performance of
I also think that there's a reason why he said, I'm proud of all of you. Because I've been on teams where coaches are like, I'm proud of you guys. And then I'm like, I didn't do anything today, coach. And when he says, like, I'm proud of all of you, it gives everybody a sense of like, oh, I'm a part of this well-oiled machine. I don't think that's a coincidence at all.
No.
We basically had no bad eggs. We had one guy that was on the fringe that ended up not playing on the team anymore. But like, he basically got pushed out by the group. Coach never had to push him out. Like, the group just kind of naturally pushed him to the side. It wasn't out of disrespect. It was just the natural nature of things. The unity of the team pushed that one bad egg. It's like, we've talked about this with, you watch a goose that gets injured, it gets left apart because it could get diseased, it could get attacked, it could get, like, they're all vulnerable. And so it pushes it out.
Isn't
aside.
that wild?
And it's so cool to see that we exhibit the exact same characteristics unintentionally.
That's amazing. Gosh.
Now, the difference in humans, though, is I've seen this on teams who have a really strong identity, is that when somebody's messing around, they'll whip them right back into shape.
Yeah.
So I think that's
there's accountability, right? There's a group
Yeah.
accountability to it. And to your point, and if you don't want to get on board, you don't have to be here.
Right. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
But here are the boundaries for the team. This is how we're going to exist. This is the culture. You may or may not want to be in this.
Crazy. Like, the number of places I've been, the ranch where I met Rebecca at, it's a full working guest ranch in Colorado, Lost Valley Ranch. There's a 0 tolerance, no dating policy. Like, if you are one-on-one with somebody of the opposite sex over hanging out, you are gone the next day. Now, guess what? Most of these are seasonal jobs, right? You're there for 2 or 3 months.
Right.
They're like,
They kept it
we're
covert,
not,
Jamie.
We're
They
not
kept it covert.
I know. It's this is a camp for celibacy. Is that the?
Yeah. But it's like, it's a Christian run and owned. Like, so they're like, we're not anti-dating.
Yeah. You're
We're
just not going to date while you're here.
While you're here.
Yeah.
Like, that's our boundary,
Yeah.
because we are here to serve these guests in the way that Christ loved the church. And if we're in all of this, like, emotional drama, you like him or her for a week or two, because we know how all that goes when you're on an emotional job like that, all these emotions, and like, you start to realize the wisdom that's in it, because as the conversations happen, it's like, I had a crush on her, ooh, I don't like her. I had a crush on him,
Yep.
ooh, I don't like him. Like,
They just eliminated the drama and said,
Right.
"Yeah,
They
knock
had-
yourself out, just not while you're here."
so I worked at a Christian sports camp in Pennsylvania called Summer's Best 2 weeks, and they pump out a bunch of marriages out of there. Nobody pumps out more than Lost Valley Ranch, and they had a no dating policy.
Crazy.
Because it took all of the emotional drama, and you got to see, like, in groups started to congregate. So you'd have like 4 or 5 people hang out together, and so they got deeper friendships, but it was in a safe space. We're here to serve those people for 2 to 3 months. Y'all can forego for 2 or 3 months, and if you don't, you're gone.
Yeah.
That's fine. And if 10 of you decide to screw that up, we'll survive with 40 of us instead of 50.
You're going to learn some self-restraint while you're here.
Yeah. And it was so good. Like, the number of people are like, man, we've been to ranches before, but like, nobody serves like y'all do.
So it's a little different than Yellowstone.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot. But it's so, like, to see the wisdom of these organizations and these coaches.
Yeah.
Different ways, but same principles.
Yeah, beautiful.
John, do you have a wait? Sorry, finish your thought. Well, I was gonna ask to Jamie, was there a situation or a speaking engagement that you went to that gave you a challenge? And I think that, like, one thing that I heard from Scott here is that, like, that policy was put into place, but like it worked out for the right reasons. I'm just curious if you ran into anybody or any, like, tough challenge to where you're like, oh crap, I'm not prepared for this, but then you possibly learned something afterwards.
That is my number one nightmare. So my number one nightmare is I'm speaking somewhere and I'm unprepared. It is the recurring nightmare all the time. And it's crazy because my 10,000 hours is in speaking. Pretty much if you give me a topic, I probably can talk at some level about it, right? But that is the fear.
He's gonna have some nightmares tonight.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Well, I was about to say-
Thanks for that. Appreciate that, Jack.
Well, and if not, that's totally fine. I was just curious if somebody's asked you a question that's been like, oh crap, like, that's really insightful, really genuine. I haven't even heard about that or theorized about it.
No.
Difficult people that you've worked with, they bring you in expecting one thing.
Yeah, but I think I'm probably wired a little bit like you. Like, it's all it is a challenging moment.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity to pivot and adjust to whatever their need is. I'm wired a little bit like Scott in that I'm very much an empath, so I'm feeling things that I can't totally articulate either in the moment. So the truth of the matter is I kind of love those moments.
Fair enough. Yeah.
You know,
I was gonna say that might be why you aren't able to make a connection to that question.
Yeah, I kind of love them, which is kind of bizarre why that's my nightmare, but it's actually one of my, like, I kind of like Life Without a Net. A couple of the TV shows we're working on, one of them is a coaching show, so it's a little bit of like Dr. Phil meets Oprah kind of vibe. It's a little bit like a talk show where we interview someone, tell the story going from surviving to thriving.
But you get a cell phone, and you get a cell phone.
And we give everybody free cell phones. But then after that, I do live coaching with the audience. And I know other people that have done this, Tony Robbins and others, and they prompt, like, you get information on people ahead of time, so you have a little bit of a window into their world or what's going on. So I knew nothing, just a live audience. I know absolutely nothing. And I'm like, let's go. We're going to go to the audience. And so they literally would just stand up and ask a question. I had to, in the moment, be present to whatever their need was and then give them something tangible and meaningful and maybe even an action for them in the moment. So I kind of like the challenge. I think it's what you talked about with your eyes closed. I kind of welcome that moment. So I don't have one that jumps out.
Love it.
I have.
That was a perfect answer to my question, by the way.
Yeah. I think there's, especially once you get to a certain level of skill, like, you have to have those challenges.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think about, back to Hank a little bit, but he said, Scott, if you think you have all the answers, you just haven't heard all the questions. And so it's not that we don't run into problems we don't have the answers to, but, like, we welcome the challenge because it makes us have to work through the things that we do know to be able to deliver value to them in one way, shape, or form.
Part of it is I don't feel pressure to have an answer. My job is to have the question. I genuinely believe everyone has the answers within them. My job is to help unlock whatever it is that has them blind.
Very true, yeah.
Yeah.
So my job is, like, I'm going to mirror back. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to do, right? So it's really finding the right question. Now, again, I told when we started, I said I spent a lot of my time as a linguist. I'm handing you words. I'm handing you phrases. I'm like, does this sound like what you're saying? And people will go, oh, yeah, that's it. Oh, okay, so then let me say that again. And then sometimes I'll frame it up a little bit differently. Because especially when people are recalling things, no one has a perfect memory. No, you don't. No. You only remember a version of what you thought you experienced, and isn't
it's
it
almost
interesting?
always attached to an emotion.
It's a game of telephone.
That's right.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting? You in your 20s, you might be like, "Yeah, this was the most horrible thing that happened," and then in your 40s, you're like, "Well, this was actually my teacher." And then in your 50s, you're like, "That was the greatest gift in my life."
Right.
And in your 70s, you're like, "What happened?" Like, right? You know, so even then, you remember it differently. Like, right? So and so that's the thing, is my job is just to keep asking things to get people to go into their inner world and find what's resonating and find what's true.
Well, it's funny, people ask, like, so should I feel this? I was like, I don't know what you're supposed to feel.
Yeah.
I ain't got a clue. Now, as I get to know them and I can get them to articulate their feels and I can put my hands on where they're at, I can start to know what it's like to be you, but I'll still never fully know what it's like.
Yeah.
So my job is to put them where they need to be and let them...
Yes. They're
like,
still taking the swing.
Right. Like, I love this. Like, if I have to be the one to give you the answer all the time, then it's never yours. It's always mine.
Yeah. Scott told me to. Well, Scott said, and at some point you want that to shift into, wait,
you tell
what
me.
I know is true is
this.
And then act.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, whenever I'm talking to somebody about a lesson that we've done or some knowledge that you've given me, I always frame it as we are working on this, and never like Scott told me to do this.
Yeah.
And I found that interesting that you were talking, they never own it, I own it. I was just like, well, you've always, I feel so empowered with my own golf game because you've given me the tools to do it myself. And that's part of it. Sometimes I'm like, why didn't Scott just like tell me what to do here? And I'm like, and then I start to get like ticked off at you, and then like a couple months down the road I'll be like, oh, I own this, like this is mine.
That's good.
it's not, I have to come back and see you to keep on getting tuned up.
Well, and so like when I tell somebody they need to work on this, that's the only thing they need to work on. Like, I know it's the only thing they need to work on. They're like, what about this? I'm like, no, stay here. Now, with that said, they have to find their own way to do that and feel that and sense that and put it in, it's not even words, put it in a sensation or an understanding that they
A muscle memory.
can hold on to.
Which means
The
they
muscles
have to
never-
have
you
an
know my answer to that.
experience.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you're right,
They
you're
have
right.
to have an
Nerves have
experience.
them,
They
yeah.
or they get to have an experience.
Right. And so, like, I think what makes me so good at what I do, and I think what makes Jamie so good at what he does, is we, as quickly as we can, take it out of our hands and put it in theirs. Now, there is some education that's
Sure,
involved.
sure.
Like, they don't just get to have the total answer all by themselves. We have to guide them and lead them through. If they have some really bad lines of thinking, we have to help them see the kind of errors in that and redirect them to the answer that's underneath that. There's something like they've just misinterpreted
Yeah,
the
yeah,
information.
yeah.
And so it's helping them feel that. Like, I'll have a guy go, I'm swinging at it too quick. I was like, okay, well, so how does the ball know that? So, like, you kind of catch them in their logic. Well, I swung too quick. Well, okay, you hit it bad, but, like, how does the ball know that you swung too quick? Well, I topped it. I was like, well, how does the ball know you topped it? I don't know. Okay, now we're
So you don't know. The
Right.
greatest success has a great line. I have no idea who I'm quoting, but the greatest this
when
happens
you read
a lot,
of
right?
books and stuff,
Yes.
you get them all mixed up.
yeah.
Steal like an artist.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. The greatest obstacle to success is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowing. Oh yeah, I know. Oh, I know. You're like, oh, this is going to be a long.
Then
day.
why are you here with me?
Right,
You know? Like, so, but like, I try to get them down to, okay, you topped it. Well, what happened? Like, why'd you top it? Well, I picked my head up. Well, how's the ball know you picked your head up? Your head's way far away from the golf ball. By the way, it's never the head. This has never been the head in 13 years. And in 50 years of Hanks, it has never been the head. It's always something else. The head can move all by itself. Everything else is moving. So, but like, you get them to kind of work through that, and then you show them. And then video is really helpful in my job. And I think somewhat in the executive coaching, results can be helpful to that. But even when I don't have video, it's like, you don't need video. You need to help them. In fact, sometimes video is better than no video. Or sorry,
Sometimes
no
not
video
having a video, yeah.
is better because they're forced to like pay attention in here and not out here.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say when you were talking about like video is a really good thing in my profession, I was about to say, but you would prefer to do it without. Like, I was about to tell you that. Like,
Yeah.
And sometimes you need video to help the person understand what they're doing, which totally makes sense. But if you were going to say like, hey, Scott, I want an hour lesson, just you and me one-on-one, no nothing, no video, I still think you'd get a same, if not a better experience.
I told Rebecca, my wife, that with this 2-camera system in here, I forgot how good I was with video. Because I've used my phone and haven't used much video because phone's it's just not standardized. And that's all I used for 2 years. And people were like, how's Scott making people so much better without all that? I was like, I don't need it. But it's so helpful. Like, I actually learn faster. I'm able to catch things that I don't normally see.
Yeah.
It helps me redirect or answer something in a new way. Or like, if they have that problem, if it's too quick, okay, I can kind of start leading them through the answers, and then I can, like, it's like it's the icing on the cake at the end. It's like the whole thing's there, and it's just like, dink. You know, like, I used appropriately. I don't use it as a crutch.
Yeah. That's good.
In fact, in here, most of the time, I let them hit some balls, bring back, get video, show them where it's at, go in and fix it, and then I may not.
Yeah.
show
In
it
my
to 'em
world,
until
we
the
just call
end.
them modalities. In my world, it's just a different modality. Like, and sometimes for some people, that modality connects differently than you saying, "Hey, I want you to feel this in your body." That may take them a little bit to get to that place.
And so it's learning to use those tools. The last thing I'll say, and I have a question on the back side of this, the kind of going into the like taking charge and having control. You're going to rephrase that because I know I didn't say it right, but
Taking responsibility.
taking responsibility.
Yeah.
In my first book, I dedicated it to a gentleman who's a mentor of mine for a long time, taught voice, ironically with the Tom Thumb thing, and I put in there, I said to Mr. Hoover, he was a voice coach for me when I was singing in high school, to Mr. Hoover, who helped me find my voice, both figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
And so when people have that voice, and I think Jack's been very helpful in helping pull that out of me, is like, I'm not afraid to stake my ground. Like this winter, stepping into the pre-elite in the elites, like we sat all the parents down. We got 18 kids. I've got all the parents in there and these kids, packed house. And I tell them all, I don't want you to coach your kids at all for the next 4 months. Don't tell them anything. Don't suggest anything. Let us do it all. And I was so nervous about that conversation. But I was like, this is who we are. This is what I need to do. I was like, I'm not saying don't ever give them advice on what shot to pick. I'm not saying don't ever push them to go practice. But let us take control of it because I need to see where they are without any outside influence.
That's good.
I asked them all to get rid of, unfollow your golf accounts, all that sort of stuff. Like, let us see where it is purely.
Trust the process.
Help you see and help you learn in a new way so that when things come in, you know what to keep and what to push away. And so the parents were super receptive of that. But I set a boundary, which was really big.
Good.
I said, this is who we are.
Nice and green. Yep.
And they're already in for 4 months.
Yep.
So they're kind of stuck. But the parents were so receptive of that. I was like,
That surprises me.
But I think we make assumptions about, and I've earned trust over the last several years.
You've earned trust, and you're right. We do make assumptions about how people think and feel. And if you've earned trust, when you earn trust, the truth of the matter is, most of us actually like boundaries. I like to
thrive under
and
boundaries.
Kids especially. So I actually kind of like knowing, what works for you and what doesn't. Because most people maliciously do not want to run over you. That is not where most people are.
Yeah.
They're acting out of their own stuff, right? So when you actually go, hey, here's what works for me and what doesn't work for me, like, oh, okay.
So my question to that, to the Mr. Hoover who helped me find my voice, is how does what you do, what your books are, this most recent book, what's the name of it again?
The Thrivalist Handbook.
The Thrivalist Handbook. How does that help people have a choice, like make a choice? What do you want to leave them with, since we're an hour and a half into this podcast? This is so good. Like, what is it that we want to?
Fundamentally, it's to remind them that they have one. You have a choice.
But Jamie, I don't have one. I have to be in this job. I have to be married to my spouse. It's like, well, okay, you've made that commitment, then that's something else has changed. But like, I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to play for this coach. I have to do.
You get to. And I would just say, how's that working for you? Like you and you, because you can. And by the way, I'm not here to remove you from your suffering. If you want to keep suffering, fantastic. Because here's what I know about suffering: it's going to teach you something. It used to be, I used to think, oh geez, I gotta rescue people. I see what's best for them. I'm gonna take their pain. And energetically, I would sometimes even merge with someone and take all that pain they were feeling. And I
know what that feels like.
Oh,
that was a flashback.
Oh gosh. And they'd walk out feeling like $1 million, and I was toast. Because I thought I was meant to be their savior. I'm going to rescue you from all this suffering. And you make really bad decisions in that place. And they didn't, and they had relief, but they did not have the cure. And by the way, that's what most of us are walking around on the planet. I just want relief, not the cure, because the cure is hard work. Most of us don't want to wake up. It's annoying to get woken up. But awakening is the journey. And it's awakening to the fact that fundamentally you have a choice. And lots of us have given, to go back to your voice, there's this little story by Hans Christian Andersen, which most of us know through Disney, not Hans, which is called The Little Mermaid.
Who is this Hans?
And in this story, a little mermaid gives up her voice because she wants love and belonging. So she trades her voice for legs. Almost all of us go through some season in life where we gave up our voice for love and belonging. We give some fundamental aspect of us away because we wanted someone, we wanted to be accepted. And as adults, we get to check in and go, what did I sell? Like, it's the quintessential, like, how did I sell my soul? Like, what was the thing when did I give my voice away? So that, and a lot of times it happens when we're being socialized as children, whatever the culture is, family system, school system, religious system. But did I give my voice away? And what would it be like to take my voice back and go, no, I have something to say. And I get to say it in my way and who I am. And my light gets to shine through the cracks where I've been broken.
It's really interesting. As you're saying this, a situation this week, I was talking with one of my college players, and it was the first time I heard them say, like, being there at like just even for a short period of time at Franklin Bridge, I felt like, well, y'all trust me. I was like, I don't think trust is the word you're looking for. Kind of doing the same thing. I was like, do you mean value? Like you feel valued? Like, yeah, my opinion matters even if it's not taken. I was like, yeah. So that's like, you want to do that. Well, where you've been, you haven't had that. And so you finally have that voice. And it's the first time I heard them say, because they were always seem to be takers. Like, this coach isn't doing this for me. This player isn't doing this for me. Like, my parents don't do this. This, like, you hear that thread. And this is the first time they said, I want to help people. Like, I want to give advice, and nobody wants to listen to me. I was like, well, A, you never had anything you stood for. Like, so that's helpful. But, like, that's really neat to hear that, like, the Bridge is producing some of that. And that's a credit to Brooks as our leader.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Brooks is amazing.
You say it's Brooks, but also, too, I would say it's everybody here. I mean, I've said this to so many people that I played golf with here. A lot of people, they're like, hey, have you heard about that River Club thing? Like, and I'll just, like, I'll be like, honestly, depending on how emotionally open they are, I'll say, in all honesty, this place in some ways has saved my life. Like, went through a horrible 2020, came here just thinking that I could knock some stress away with hitting some balls, and just got so much value from this place. I think a lot of that is dedicated to you, but of course the environment is Brooks's.
That culture matters, right?
But I think that this piece of property has been a lifesaver for me in that regard.
It's why we don't have a bunch of guys who've been in the business for 35 years coming in, and like we could have one of them come in and tighten up the ship perfectly right out of the gate.
Right.
But we'd button down on operations and we'd lose relations with people. And it's like we're buttoning down on those spots, and it takes time. Well, he's okay making mistakes. He's like, he knows everybody here's made mistakes, myself included. Like, but they don't define you.
It's good.
And he doesn't assume intent of malicious intent and everything.
That's right.
Like, you didn't show up and work on time because you just don't care about your job.
Most people are actually doing the best they can with the tools they have.
Yeah.
That's actually how most people are showing up in the world. And if we'll lead with compassion and recognize that's all of us. Most of the suffering that happens on the planet is perceived separation. And this is Jungian psychology, but you are me and I am you. When I look at you, the thing that irritates me the most is actually a reflection of whatever I'm bothered about in me. So the next time you're annoyed with someone, pay really close attention because it's something you're ignoring in yourself. And which, you know, Jesus' language around that is just judge not, lest you be not judged in the same way, right?
Yeah.
Spiritual teachers are saying the same thing. That's what's happening. So the pain comes from perceived separation. Wait, we are all human beings working out the human experience. We are all light and shadow. If we would have patience and compassion, I'm not saying it's not easy. It's really hard at times.
And it doesn't mean you let somebody run over a boundary.
And it doesn't mean we don't have boundaries.
Right.
We negotiate, we take ownership, we set
why
boundaries.
there's laws in place.
That's right. We make agreements.
Right.
And one of the things I say to my clients is, hey, all expectations are premeditated resentments. You're never... all expectations are premeditated resentments.
Towards...
You're never allowed to have an expectation again. Because an expectation is filled with ambiguity. I call it common sense. I say, well, of course you, and I make an assumption. And it's an assumption based on my birth order, my Myers-Briggs, based on my family of origin, based on my culture. I created an expectation. So, of course, nothing exists in a vacuum. You know this better than anybody. So you have to replace it. So this is, again, back to Jesus.
You can't just stop something.
No.
It has to be.
Remember, we're back. We'll use Jesus' teaching again. Back to spiritual teaching. When somebody's like, "Cast out the demon." Why? If I do, have more will come in. Right? You can't leave it in a vacuum. You have to replace it. The replacement is get rid of all expectations and replace them with agreements. Hey, do we have an agreement? Hey, what time are you going to be home? 5:30. Do we have an agreement around that? Yes. So if you're not home at 5:30, that's a broken agreement. Yes. Super clear. What time are you coming home? I'll be home, a little bit after work. Opportunity for a lot of resentment.
Yeah. And so this is kind of neat because I used to be afraid of like not coming home, like because I used to just come home whenever because I would stay. Again, I had no boundaries, so Steve would ask, or I'd just stay there longer, and I'd I'd resent. And I go home, and Rebecca would resent that, and then I couldn't help this person. And then it's just like this, like all over the place. But with this podcast, Rebecca's giving, like, as we've talked about it, like podcast night is my night.
It's your night.
I could, like, we could stay here till 10:30, and it wouldn't.
It's okay because we have a clear agreement.
We have a and I just haven't thought about that because I've always been afraid to do this. But I'm actually not afraid to do this anymore because there is an agreement.
Life gets really cleaned up when you remove expectations. Just replace them with agreements.
We call that in real estate, we call it an upfront contract, right?
Yeah.
We'll say, hey, listen, can we agree before we start, like, hey, let's say we're meeting for you to buy a house, right? I'll say, hey, Jamie, thanks so much for coming to meet me. I've got 60 minutes set out for this meeting. Is that still okay with you? You say, yes, it is. So now it protects me so I can get through my stuff. And he just can't say, oh, I got to go pick up the kids in, 15 minutes.
That's right.
Right. And so now I don't feel rushed. I feel like we do have enough for an agreement. And at the end too, we also set an agreement saying, at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about how, we would talk about if this is a good fit to work together. Do you feel like me and my team are a good fit for you moving forward? And it's amazing because now we don't have to.
It's so clear because we actually long for those kinds of boundaries and clarity.
What is the biggest thing in sales? The biggest thing in sales is when you get in front of a client and they're like, I'll think about it.
Right.
I would rather leave with a definite no than a maybe.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
I would rather clear that out of my headspace and move on to the next potential client than having to follow up, be like, have you thought about it yet? Because then you get further and further and further from the person. So these upfront contracts are amazing to be able to just establish the expectations.
I love it.
Yep. Cool. Well, I think we're at an hour 40 here. Jamie, I want to leave you with some time to promote anything that you want to promote. We thank you for blessing us with your time today.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I nothing to promote. Maybe an invitation if you're interested in hearing more about kind of what's happening in our world. We have a podcast called the Thrivalist Podcast. And of course, the book's there on Amazon, the Thrivalist Handbook. And
does it have a green triangle on it?
It? Not on it, but in it.
Oh.
Yes. Not on it, but in it. But no, this was just a joy to be with you guys. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. Thanks for being here. So, y'all, thanks so much for being with us here, hour and 40 minutes. We're experimenting with this longer form podcast. I think it is amazing when we have a guest. Because we can then establish those relationships. That's right. So it's been amazing. Jamie, thanks so much for taking the time. And
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Arcos. Thank you, Strixon, for sponsoring the Champions Playbook and cracking the code here this winter at Franklin Bridge. Make sure to follow Scott on Instagram at @ShassyGolf, 2 S's, 2 E's. Also, too, we're everywhere that you listen to podcasts. So if you're listening to this on Apple, please press pause right now and roll down and give us a 5-star rating, and also leave us a review because that helps when people are searching golf podcasts in the search bar. We pop up first. So if you're on Apple, make sure you do that. If you're on Spotify, that looks like a form of a follow. I believe on the Spotify platform, and we just really appreciate y'all's feedback and being
and I get the last word on this one.
Okay.
So we talked before we started this that Jack came in around episode 70.
Around there.
Ballpark, maybe a little before then. He's done 130 episodes plus, probably close to 150 at this point. He's done all the hard work behind the scenes. I just show up and have a good time. And we're working to promote more.
It's fun for me.
Not only should you get the Arcos thing for you, we get a little kickback from Arcos for doing that. And those dollars go to this gentleman right here. Because I set that up that way because that matters to me for the time that he's put in. And he doesn't do it for the dollars. He really doesn't.
No.
He doesn't.
And he's a gifted interviewer, man. You've got skills.
He is.
I appreciate
it.
Yeah.
And so if you all see Jack, give him a big thanks. Buy the Arcos, One Rule 15. Buy it for somebody for Christmas. It's great. It's a great gift. So Jack, thank you. That's not our friendship is the way I say thank you the best. But we're working to add some dollars in this gentleman's pocket. If you see him, say thanks. If you're looking to buy a house, go see, he's incredible. He's going to take care of you, and his team's awesome. So I've never promoted his work on the podcast.
That's good.
It's like we need
I will cut that and put it up front.
Put it up front, put it in minute 5, minute 10, minute 15. This podcast just got to be 2 hours.
Push the 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
So thank you.
Do you want to sign off? Do you know how to
No,
do it?
you good.
All
You're
right,
good.
all right.
That's all you, man.
So
Your
from
voice sounds better.
Jamie, Scott, and me here in the studio at Franklin Bridge, we'll see you on the next one. Peace.